Hi, this is Ethan Cusick, and today we're going to be going over the steps you should take before you start sewing a project. We are going to be going over choosing your material and thread, choosing your needle, style, size, all that good stuff, how to thread your machine, how to wind bobbins, and some other tools you might need along the way. This tutorial is going to be, mostly for beginners who are just not sure how to set up their sewing machine at all. There is quite a few steps. It's all very simple and anybody can do it. But I just wanted to make a, streamlined guide of how to make sure you can get perfect stitches on your first try. All right, so let's jump into the video. I'm going to show you my machine and we'll get into it. We're going to be going over fabrics and threads. So these two items are very important. Depending on your project, there are tons of different fabrics to choose from. For mostly beginner-friendly sewing projects, I like to stick with cotton for everyday items, denim or canvas for sturdy bags or apparel, knit fabrics for comfy tees and leggings. But depending on what fabric you choose for your project, you're going to need a corresponding size and type of thread. So I'm going to post a couple charts up here that are going to show you pretty much what styles of thread and what sizes of thread are going to work for your fabric and for your project. So there are a couple different things to think about on top of the size and the style, which is how big of a thread size can your sewing machine take? Typically, home machines cannot go that large. I think Tex 40 is probably pushing it. So if you have an industrial machine, you can go higher, and even industrial machines cap out. Like my Juki here can only go to about 70. You can maybe push to 90. Hex is essentially just one of the units of measurement for thread thickness. Keep in mind as well that there are a lot of different standards for each size of thing within sewing. So Googling is going to be your best friend. The last thing to keep in mind is your color of your thread. So you always want to go slightly darker. So, if you have a choice between, let's just say these two threads, right, for this fabric right here, you're going to want to go with a darker one, because even if it doesn't match perfectly, there's going to be less contrast. Unless you want to go for a contrast stitching look, you're going to want to choose the darker of the threads you have available to you. Now we're going to be going over winding bobbins. There is a couple reasons why you might want to consider winding some bobbins of the thread you're going to be using for your project before you go ahead and start sewing. The main reason is going to be that for most machines, not this industrial here, but most home machines, you are going to have to take your thread all the way out and then load up your bobbins to be wound. The problem with that is, you might accidentally rethread your machine wrong. It wastes time. So just having a couple bobbins, 2 to 3 is typically what I recommend for projects, depending on the size. Just pre-wound and ready to go is going to be super, super helpful for you. So this is the bobbin itself. This is where the thread gets wrapped around, and this is the bobbin case. I'll show you how to thread the bobbin case in a second, but we're going to go over just how to wind bobbins on industrial machines using an auto winder, which is what this one has, and then how to wind bobbins on a machine that does not have it. So most home machines are going to be like that. So this is the auto winder assembly that is standard on most industrial sewing machines. So how this works is there's a wheel here that makes contact with the belt that spins while the machine is sewing. So when you push this forward, as you can see, the wheel makes contact with the belt, spinning this here. So this is where the bobbin goes, right on there. And what you do is you thread this assembly, wind the bobbin a little bit, push it, and then it will auto wind the bobbins while you're sewing. You can do this while you're not sewing, but you'd have to take your thread out of the needle and make sure nothing gets jammed up. So I'm going to show you how to wind it real quick, how to thread it real quick. So you have your thread up here coming out of the eyelet of the thread stand. It doesn't have to be from the second one, it can be from the first one. So we're going to pull it down. What you're going to do is put it through this hole right here. And just like tension discs on the tension assembly on the machine, you are going to push it down, making sure it's fully seated in this disc here. And this disc does have a tension spring as well, so that you can actually adjust how tight you want the bobbins wound, because you can wind the bobbins too light or too tight. It's going to be set from the factory, so you shouldn't have to mess with it, but if you are having problems, with your bobbin tension, you might want to check out how tight it is being wound. So you're going to pull this through. You're going to take your bobbin with the holes facing out. Some bobbins have holes on both sides, so it doesn't really matter in that case. I like to start a little bit farther back. I go ahead and just wrap it around a couple times. Okay, and then you take your thread end and you're going to push it through one of these holes. You want just a little tail sticking out. You're going to pull it. I push it forward a little bit, push it on, and lock it into place. So now it's going to wind this bobbin while I'm sewing. You can keep doing this, as you're sewing. When you hear it click back, it's going to make a little noise. And you can just have your bobbins being wound while you're sewing, which is a really big advantage of these industrial machines. So now we're going to go over how to wind a bobbin on a standard machine. So this is a standard home machine. Your bobbin is going to be located somewhere in this vicinity here. Same as those, but sometimes they have these top load bobbins like this. And take your empty bobbin, and what you're going to do is first, we'll set this here. And there's usually a little diagram. So this one right here has a diagram of how the bobbin winder works on your machine. If not, feel free to look it up. But on this one, we're going to thread it around here. Okay, just once. And then we are going to wind it around the bobbin. It's very simple. Sorry, I'm at an awkward angle, but it's going to work pretty much the exact same as an auto winder on a industrial machine, at least in terms of how you start it. Okay, and then you're going to place this here. So we're going to cut this end off. Okay, and we're going to push this over. So we locked it into place now, and now the machine is going to be in the mode to wind the bobbin. So after that, you're just going to press down on the pedal as normal, and you're going to start winding your bobbin. Pretty simple. Now let's get into needles. Before we get into what needle to pick, here's a quick description of what all of the numbers on the packaging for the needle means. You're going to want to know roughly what all this stuff means to make sure that you're picking out the right kind of needle for your project, your machine, and your thread type. First, we're going to go over what style of needle fits your machine. There are different sizes of needle. This is going to be the shank. I'm going to insert a picture here of what all the different components of the needle are, because there's a few different pieces of the needle itself that you're going to want to know the names of so that you can, understand the references I'm making. So here's a picture of that. So the shank of the needle, you're going to need to fit to your machine. Next, we're going to choose a needle based on what size thread you're using. So depending on what size thread, / the thickness of the material, you're going to want a different size needle. So that's going to be the lower part of the needle, the width of that, because it's going to determine how strong the needle is. So how thick a fabric can go through, essentially. It's also going to determine the size of the eyelet, so how thick of thread can go through that eyelet and not cause any problems. Here's a chart showing some sizes to materials and sizes to threads of needles. So you're going to want to reference these charts. They're online, but I'll post them here as well, to kind of basically choose the needle type you need for your project. And then there's also the style of the needle. So needle tips come in a bunch of different styles. There are ballpoint, there are sharp, there are universal. There is a needle type for every kind of fabric, and there is overlap. But again, you're going to want to take all of these factors into account when you are picking a needle, because it will make a difference on your final product. This is how you take a needle in and out of the machine. So you're going to want to grab a screwdriver. Typically a flathead is going to be what the set screw here for the needle is going to be. I removed the presser foot and the top thread just to make it a little bit clearer so you can see what's going on here. We're going to take it out, loosen the needle, and pull down. So some needles have a flat bit on the shank here. And so it's only going to fit into your machine one way. This industrial machine and a lot of other machines I've used do not have that, and they can spin around, right? So you're going to want to be careful on those machines of which way the scarf is facing. So the scarf, I don't know if you'll be able to see it from this angle, but there is a flat bit of the needle itself here. And it's right where the eyelet is, or slightly above the eyelet. You're going to want to point the scarf in a direction based on where your bobbin is located in your machine. Some bobbins are on the top here like this, some are on the side like this, some are in the front like this. So you're going to want to look up, based on your machine, which direction the scarf goes on the needle. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. So on my machine, the scarf faces this direction because my bobbin is right here. So I'm going to insert right back in. Okay, I'm going to twist it a little bit until I can get the scarf aligned properly where the divot, is facing this direction. And I'm just going to push it up as far as I can. Okay, and I'm going to tighten it. Just like that. It is that simple. So that is how you insert a needle into a machine. Now we're going to go over how to thread your machine. So to start off, you're typically going to have, on industrial machines, you're going to have this right here, which is our thread sand. And this guides the thread from the top down. This mechanism just kind of removes a lot of the play that there can be. This can jump around quite a bit. So this, giving it a little bit more length here, helps out the machine. So we're going to take our thread, now we're at the top of the machine. We're going to put it through this top tension disc here, through this guide here. Now we're going to go through the tension discs themselves. You want to release the pressure on the tension discs to open them up so that the thread can seat properly. Then through the take-up spring, underneath this lever here, through the guide. Okay, we're going to go through the lever into that guide. Okay, now we're going to go around this guide here. Through this guide here. And then we are going to thread the machine in the direction of the needle scarf. So, going to go from the back through to the scarf. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see here. Just like that. Now we'll be threading the bobbin. So, we are going to want the bobbin going in a particular direction. So, on this bobbin, we're going to want it going clockwise when you pull it. Okay? It's going to be for most machines, but double check if you watch this tutorial specific to your machine. And then we are going to, let me restart this real quick. We are going to put it in, okay? And then we're going to let it go through this little slit right here. We're going to pull it over and pop it into this top section here. So it should be seated now. You should be able to pull on it. You want to make sure it's seated in this gap here. I have my machine up like this right now just to make demonstration a little bit easier. But there is an orientation of how your bobbin's going to go in. Again, every machine is a little bit different. Some have little guides, some just slide in and click. This one, you just slide in and click. And you'll know it's seated when it clicks like that. Okay? From here, you are good to go. I'm going to cut this thread just a little bit easier so I can bring the machine back down. But again, this is a general tutorial on how to thread a bobbin and insert it. Every machine is going to be slightly different. So check your owner's manual or go ahead and just watch another YouTube video on your machine specifically. Now we're going to show you how to pull the thread up from the bobbin. So I have my hand on the hand wheel to the right. So this is the wheel that you can turn by hand. And I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on the pedal, and I'm going to be holding the top thread. I'm going to put it in one revolution, okay? And it's going to come back up. Once the needle reaches the top of its rotation, after one full rotation, I'm going to pull up, and that pulls the bobbin thread with it. So now we have both threads visible. You're going to want to do this before you start sewing. Otherwise, it can jam up and you can have some problems. Now we're going to be getting into tension. Tension is very important to make sure that you have strong and clean looking stitches. It is kind of one of the more complicated things, I would say, when setting up a machine, but I wouldn't be too intimidated of it. So every machine has a slightly different tension setup. Industrial machines function in a similar way to home machines, but all the parts here are exposed for the most part. So you have your tension discs here, which you will not see on a standard home machine. You will just have a dial with numbers on them that correlate to how tight the top and bottom tension are. So I'm going to show you on an industrial machine here, but the process is going to be essentially the same for a home machine as well. So the first thing I like to do is I get a piece of fabric from the material that we are going to be using in the project. It is important to do this because different materials require different tension settings. So we want the material we're going to be sewing with. We are also going to want the needle we're going to be sewing with, and we're going to want to use the same thread thickness that we're going to be sewing with. If you have the ability to, my suggestion is to get contrasting threads. So we have an orange and a white here with a black fabric. So what this allows you to do is see very clearly whether the top or bottom tension is loose. I'm going to show you some examples of that in a minute, but to start, we're going to want to set our stitch length to 5, which is the highest on my machine. I try to go in the highest range because it's easier to see the threads. It's also where the machine struggles the most. And we're just going to do a couple stitches just to see how the machine is performing before we go ahead and mess with anything. Okay, so here are some examples of bad tension. So on this first example right here, we have too tight top tension and too loose bottom tension, or both. So as you can see, the top thread is very, very loose. You can, pretty easily just pick it right out, right? You can see the orange coming through the bottom. So that is bad tension. But as you'll notice, there's some parts where it's a little messed up, but you can't see the white here. So this is indicative of bad tension. So next is going to be the inverse of that. So our top thread looks good, but if you look, our bottom thread, the white is showing through, and see how easily that pulls through. This is why tension is really important, because your stitches are not going to be strong if they're not grabbing properly. We're going to go over how to adjust your tension now. So once you've done your tester, if it turns out good, then great, just leave it where it's at for now. I would, as you're sewing, going through more layers or changing materials in your project, I would keep continuing to just take note of the tension on the stitches you're doing and adjust accordingly. I am going to put a chart up here on the screen that goes over what to look out for a little bit better than maybe the demonstration that I gave you. And I kind of just like to keep one of those handy. You get used to it after a while, but sometimes I just forget what is what. So it's nice to have a reminder of how to address the tension issues when they come up. So adjusting your top tension, if you need to do that, you're going to use this dial right here. So turning it counterclockwise is going to loosen the tension. Turning it clockwise is going to tighten the tension. And all this is doing is pushing on a spring. So this spring pushes on these plates, and these plates push on the thread. And how tight the plates push on the thread is how tight it's going to be for your top tension. It's harder to pull this through. There's more tension, right? So it's pretty self-explanatory. On industrial machines, you typically have this plate setup, as I mentioned, but on home machines, you just have numbers mostly. You have a little dial. So I would just turn that up or down if you're dealing with tension issues. Next, we're going to go over bobbin tension. So this is your bottom tension on your bobbin case. So the way you adjust the tension on your bobbin case, you essentially just want to make sure that this thread does not come out too fast or not enough. So I'm just using this X-Acto knife because the screw is tiny, but there is a tiny screw here that pushes on this plate here that sandwiches the thread between the case and this plate. So by tightening it, you're clamping that thread down more and upping your tension. And by loosening it, you are, allowing more thread to pass through. So how to check this? A lot of people leave this alone. I mess with it, I feel like, more than maybe I should. But I typically use the rule of thumb to essentially tighten it down a little bit, and check how far it's dropping. So right now it's free falling. We don't really want that. We want it to drop by about an inch. So now it's too tight, right? If you give it a little bounce, it's not dropping at all. So you want to loosen it until it drops about an inch. You can use very small increments here. Okay, that's closer. Maybe loosen up just a little bit more. But there we go. So I would typically set your bobbin to about this tension to start your project off, and then adjust it if needed. Typically, you're going to set your bottom tension first, and then you're going to go ahead and adjust your top tension to match. Another thing to note is when you up or downsize the size of thread you're using, you're going to have to adjust this, because all this is doing is sandwiching the thread between the plate and the case. So if you have thicker thread, what's going to happen is it's going to up the tension. So you need to adjust that anytime you're switching out for different thread thicknesses. Now we're going to go for stitch length. Stitch length is the length between each stitch. Pretty self-explanatory. Depending on what you are sewing, essentially what part of the garment or bag or what have you that you're sewing, you're going to want to use a different stitch length. For the inside of seams, I like to use between a 3 and a 3.5. And for top stitching, so the thread you're going to see on the top, on the face of the garment or the bag, I like to use closer to a 4. This is subjective though, because each machine has slightly different measurements for how long their stitch lengths are. So just because I'm saying use those doesn't necessarily mean you should do that too. Although it does not matter that much. I would say if you're just starting out, sticking to right around a 3 is going to be a good place for you if you are a little bit worried. But I'm going to show you examples of what all the stitches look like on my Juki here. And then you can kind of reference your machine to kind of decide what you'd like to use as well. Okay, so here's some different examples of stitch lengths. This is going to be a 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, the last thing we're going to go over today is going to be having your tools ready. So there's going to be a couple tools that you're going to want to have near your sewing machine. If you watched my sewing machine setup tour, which I highly recommend you check out if you are interested in how to set up your sewing machine, I typically like to have my tools close by because I don't want to stand up and have to walk around quite a bit, especially if it's things I want to be doing at the machine here. So I have my snippers right here. I love this magnet because, it's always right there. It's not, I don't set it over to the side or anything or it can get knocked off. Right there. I have a lighter for burning the ends of threads. Optional, but helpful. I have my extra feet up here. Typically, I just use this standard foot here and this top stitch foot, although if I'm using zipper feet or anything like that, they'll also live up there while I'm working on the project. I have this little magnet right here just for pins. So when I'm done with my pins, I pop it right there. I also like to have extra bobbins right up here. So I have extra bobbins stored up there, along with some sewing clips and some extra, needles. I also like to have a trash can. So I keep a trash can right nearby. Sorry for the extension cord, that is for the light I'm using. But I like to have a trash can right here, just to immediately drop threads into. Super duper helpful. I also like to have my tools right here. So I usually keep a medium-sized screwdriver, a larger one, and an X-Acto knife because I use this to rip seams because I'm a weirdo. That has been how I set up my machine before I work on any projects. I highly recommend that you revisit this video whenever you're starting a project until it's kind of all saturated in your brain. I think it's really helpful to avoid a lot of the frustrations that people typically go through when they first start sewing, and I hope it was helpful for anybody watching. If you'd like to see more sewing content, please feel free to subscribe to my channel, give this video a like, and comment any suggestions of videos that you'd like to see coming up soon. I'm Ethan Cusick. Thank you for watching.